November 23, 1943. 20,000 feet above Rabaul. Captain Jake Morrison stared forward through a scratched canopy as 36 Japanese Zeros climbed toward him, their formations tightening like hornets rising from a nest. 5 minutes earlier, his wingman had called in engine trouble and turned back. Now Morrison was alone, one P-47 Thunderbolt facing 3 full squadrons of experienced enemy pilots. The smart move was obvious. Run. Morrison pushed the throttle forward instead. He had been flying since he was 14, crop dusting his father's fields in a battered Stearman, learning instinctively how air behaved when pushed to its limits. Long before flight school, he had learned a simple truth. Airplanes didn't fight, physics did. At medium altitude, the Zero was deadly. It could turn tighter, climb faster, and its pilots knew these skies intimately. But Morrison wasn't interested in medium altitude. At 25,000 feet, the fight belonged to him. He eased the Thunderbolt into a climbing spiral. 21,000. 22. The Pratt & Whitney engine roared as the turbo supercharger howled, forcing power into thinning air. His manifold pressure needle trembled at the edge of redline. 23,000. 24. Below him, the Zeros began to falter. Their carbureted engines struggled in the thin air, coughing as they clawed upward. Morrison checked his oxygen flow, steady. Good for another hour. The abandoned bomber base they were protecting lay 15 miles south, its fuel dumps packed with aviation gas. Enough to keep Japanese fighters flying for months. Flight school rules echoed in his head. Never surrender altitude. Never attack alone against superior numbers. Morrison broke both. He rolled inverted and pulled hard. The altimeter spun backward as the P-47 dropped like a stone. Airspeed surged past 400 miles per hour. The Zeros scattered, but they were moving through syrup compared to his dive. Morrison lined up the lead aircraft. At 800 yards, still accelerating, he squeezed the trigger. 8.50 caliber machine guns erupted. The Zero didn't burn or explode. It simply ceased to exist, shredded into fragments by sheer kinetic violence. Morrison held the dive, jinked left, and found another Zero trying desperately to climb into his path. Another burst. The aircraft folded in half and tumbled toward the ocean. The airspeed needle crept past 470. The Thunderbolt shuddered, wings groaning under forces they were never meant to feel. Morrison eased back, muscles straining as G-forces crushed him into the seat. His vision tunneled, darkened at the edges. He grunted, tightened his core, forced blood back into his head. The zoom climb hurled him upward through the shattered formation like a launched rocket. By the time the Japanese pilots reacted, he was already passing 18,000 feet. Their engines gasped. Couldn't follow. At 23,000, Morrison leveled off and checked fuel. Enough for 3 more passes. Yesterday, a mechanic from Houston had spent 6 hours tuning his turbocharger, tweaking mixture controls, chasing every ounce of high-altitude performance. She'll give you 2,000 extra feet, the mechanic had said. Might save your life. Now it was the only reason Morrison was still alive. Below, the Zeros regrouped into defensive circles at 15,000 feet, each plane covering the next, a textbook tactic that had slaughtered careless American pilots since the war began. Morrison climbed again, 26,000 feet. Ice formed along the canopy. The temperature gauge read -40. His breath came sharp and fast through the oxygen mask as Rabaul shrank into a toy world. Tiny ships in harbor, the airfield a brown scar in the jungle. He rolled inverted once more. This dive was steeper, faster. At this speed, he wasn't an airplane anymore. He was gravity. The dive shattered the defensive wheel. Zeros scattered in panic as Morrison tore through the formation, guns blazing. One aircraft erupted into flame. Another disintegrated under a clean deflection shot. He didn't linger. He never lingered. Speed was life. Altitude was life. He pulled up hard, the Thunderbolt clawing skyward again. 20,000. 22. Below him, Japanese pilots tried to regroup, but confusion rippled through their ranks. They were good, some of the best in the Pacific, veterans of China and the early war, but they were trained for turning fights, for contests of agility and patience. Morrison wasn't dancing. He was hammering. His father's voice surfaced in his mind, carried from dusty Texas fields. Never fight a bull in his pen. Make him come to you. Morrison had made his pin at 25,000 feet. Third pass. This time he came out of the sun. The Zeros saw him, but seeing didn't help when the attacker was moving at 500 miles per hour. He fired once, watched a Zero erupt into debris, shifted aim without thinking, muscle memory taking over. Another Japanese fighter spiraled down, trailing black smoke. A third pilot bailed out, parachute blooming white against the blue. Morrison felt a flicker of respect. That took courage. Then the math caught up. Fuel gauge sliding toward a quarter tank. Nearly 30 enemy fighters still airborne. And now, more were taking off from Rabaul, climbing in tight, disciplined formations. Reinforcements. In 10 minutes, the sky would belong to Japan again. The radio crackled. Thunder 1, this is Thunder Base. Return to base immediately. Repeat, RTB immediately. Someone was watching on radar. Someone had seen the odds. Morrison ignored the call, because he'd spotted something else. The Japanese reinforcements were climbing directly over the abandoned bomber base. Strict spacing. Perfect formation. Every pilot's eyes locked upward, on him. He smiled grimly and fired his guns dry at maximum range, tracers arcing uselessly through empty sky. He wasn't trying to hit anything. He was baiting them. Every Zero turned to track him. Below, for B-25 Mitchell bombers burst from a cloud bank at 500 feet, racing straight toward the fuel dumps. Morrison's mission briefing echoed in his head. Keep the fighters looking up. 15 minutes. The bombers need to. He climbed again, but the Thunderbolt felt heavy now. Oil pressure sagged. Cylinder head temperatures crept into the red. The engine coughed, coughed again. Zeros clawed upward behind him, sensing weakness. One came dangerously close, 2,000 feet below and closing. Then the fuel dump detonated. Even from 15 miles away, Morrison felt the concussion. A pillar of fire punched skyward, black smoke boiling upward as secondary explosions rippled across the base. Fuel, ammunition, aircraft on the ground. Japanese pilots hesitated, torn between pursuit and defense. Too late for both. Morrison turned southeast for home. The Thunderbolt was dying now. Oil streaked the windscreen. The engine missed every few strokes. 1-0 stayed with him, pushing higher than it ever should have. Morrison had no ammunition left. Barely enough fuel to make it back, if the engine held. The Japanese pilot closed to 500 yards. Then his engine quit. Just died. The Zero dropped away into a flat spin, its pilot demanding more than thin air could give. Morrison watched him fall until the aircraft recovered at 10,000 feet, far below where the fight mattered. The flight home was agony. 30 minutes out, the engine seized completely. Morrison went dead stick, trading altitude for distance, calculating glide ratios with icy clarity. A calm voice from the tower, a former schoolteacher from Kansas, talked him in, altitude and distance ticking down like a prayer. 5 miles. 3,000 feet. You've got this, Thunder 1. The P-47 barely cleared the runway threshold. Wheels touched down. The aircraft rolled to a stop, engine frozen solid, tanks bone dry. Ground crews swarmed the plane. Morrison sat motionless, hands shaking too hard to unbuckle. The mechanic from Houston climbed onto the wing, stared at the ruined engine, and whistled softly. How the hell is this thing still in one piece? Morrison peeled off his oxygen mask, leaving skin behind where it had frozen. You built her, he said quietly. The debrief was surreal. 7 confirmed kills. 2 probables. 200,000 gallons of aviation fuel destroyed. Japanese operations in the sector crippled for weeks. Colonels argued whether to court-martial Morrison for disobeying orders or award him the Distinguished Flying Cross. Morrison barely listened. He drank coffee that tasted like heaven and stared at the wall, thinking about the parachute he'd seen open. That night, lying in the suffocating heat, sleep wouldn't come. The math of combat was simple. Energy, angle, timing. The math of living with it was something else entirely. Only Peterson stayed. After that day, Morrison turned down every offer for a new wingman. Teaching someone else how to survive at altitude felt too much like teaching them how to die. Peterson understood without words. They flew close enough to read intention in the slightest wing twitch. A shallow climb meant danger. A brief waggle meant break. Radio calls became unnecessary. June brought perfect flying weather, clear sky from sea level to 40,000 feet. Morrison would remember June 15th forever. They were escorting B-24s deep over enemy territory. 18,000 feet for the bombers. 23 for Morrison and Peterson. Then the Zeros came, not climbing from below, but diving from above. Somehow they'd reached 30,000 feet, circling wide before striking. Morrison had lost his advantage. No altitude, no margin. He pushed the nose down, built speed, then hauled the Thunderbolt into a brutal vertical climb. The aircraft shuddered but kept going. 24, 25, 26,000. The Zeros followed and began to suffocate. Morrison hammerhead at the top, kicked rudder, and dropped behind the lead Zero. One burst. Gone. Then chaos. Peterson came in from below, guns blazing, scattering attackers long enough for Morrison to rebuild energy. They fought for 20 minutes. Dives, zoom climbs, slashing passes. When it ended, 7 Zeros were down. Peterson's Thunderbolt was dying. White smoke streamed from the engine. Morrison stayed with him, talking constantly, counting miles, pretending the math might change. At 8,000 feet, the engine seized. Peterson tried to bail out. The canopy jammed. Morrison watched him put the P-47 down on a narrow beach, controlled to the end. Peterson climbed out, waved once, then disappeared into the jungle. They never found him. After that, Morrison flew alone. Kills stacked up, 30, then 35, but the numbers stopped meaning anything. Enemy aircraft became problems to solve, not men to fight. Physics replaced emotion. Angle plus velocity equaled result. In August, orders came. Morrison was going home. His last mission was supposed to be easy. Photo escort. No combat expected. Zeros appeared anyway. 8 of them. Young pilots. Late war desperation. Morrison dove once more, not out of duty but habit. 3 fell on the first pass. 2 more on the second. The rest fled. He let them go. Morrison landed his last combat mission on August 20th, 1945. 2 weeks later, the war ended. Texas felt wrong. The sky was too low. Crop dusting made him nervous. He quit flying. Nightmares replaced missions. Peterson walking out of the jungle. Engines failing at 8,000 feet, altitude that never stopped climbing. Morrison found peace only in machines. Engines were honest. They either ran or they didn't. He married, raised children, never spoke of kills. Years later, they found a Model P-47 in his workshop, guns removed, ammunition bays filled with carved wooden birds. On the base, he'd written a single line. What it should have been. Morrison died quietly in 1998. His logbook told one story, 43 victories, perfect arithmetic. The last page told another. A list of names, Peterson first. At the bottom, one sentence. The math of war is simple. The math of living with it is not. His grandson, now a pilot himself, keeps the book. Sometimes, climbing through 25,000 feet, he understands what Morrison meant. Up there, everything is clear. Cold. Precise. Down here it never is. Morrison found the perfect altitude to survive the war. He spent the rest of his life learning how to live below it.